I want to share everything I've learned about pricing in the last 15 years or so, working both as a freelancer myself, and I've hired a few hundred people, few hundred freelancers through my production company. And I want to be as transparent as possible because I feel like for a long time I was really confused about pricing. I really didn't know what to charge, and no one seemed to want to share this information for some reason, and they kept it to themselves. And let me know in the comment section about your experience when it comes to pricing and setting your rates too. Okay, first let's talk about how to actually charge for what we do. In this line of work, in the video production line of work, people invoice in two ways. It's either based on a half-day rate or a full-day rate. No one really charges hourly on the production side. Now, editing rates are very common when it comes to pre-production, things like writing, or when it comes to post-production like editing. But I'm going to keep this video mainly on the production side of things, or the shoot days. So the number of hours in a full day depends on the type of product or the type of video you're creating. In the corporate and commercial type of projects where I really come from, it's usually based on a 10-hour rate. And that is from the call time where you show up to a location all the way to the wrap when you leave a location. That's 10 hours. For narrative type projects, sometimes for bigger productions on the commercial side, it's a 12-hour standard. Now, half-day rates is usually 5 or 6 hours, again, depending on the type of project. Now, typically more seasoned people, they never offer any sort of half-day rates. This has been my experience. I don't do this myself either because our day is typically gone. It's not like we could do 2 projects in one day. Usually, maybe in the real estate world, maybe you can. But in the type of projects I do, that's never been a thing that's really easy to fit in. So that's all I have is a full day rate. And you may have a half-day rate. Let's say you're doing traveling. That's usually based on a half-day. Or sometimes location scout, tech scout, things like that are based on a half-day too. Again, this is totally up to you. But in my experience, and when you get more seasoned, you usually just have one rate. And it's based on a full day, 10 or 12 hours. Now, the second and the big thing I've noticed when I talk to a lot of newer freelance filmmakers and videographers, they don't ever separate their gear they bring to a shoot from the labor, their actual time. This is really critical. You have to charge separately for your time and then for your gear. Even if you don't show this to the production company or to the producer in your invoice when you actually send the bill, it could be not part of your breakout, but you do have to keep track of this internally. What I did was I just didn't take any jobs that provided their own gear. I came with gear, so that's really how I decided to work. But I still charge separately for the two. There is a labor rate, that's your time, and then there's the cost of gear rental. I'll talk about gear rental in a little bit. Now, how this time is tracked and how you break up the labor and gear, this has been the norm for a very long time. When I talk to guys that are still doing this in their 70s, they tell me pretty much nothing has changed in that norm. So if you're doing it differently, that's okay. Just know that that's not the industry standard. The industry standard is separate tracking of labor and separate tracking and billing for invoice. It could, again, be in the same invoice, but you usually track them as 2 line items. Okay, let's get into the actual dollar amounts, the numbers. I've hired people in 25, 26 different states in the US. I have a little experience in Europe, but most of my experience is in the US. The heavy bulk of it is in the Midwest and Chicago where we do production. But again, I hire people all over when I do shoots across the country. So I'm using that as the baseline. Keep in mind, my experience is in the corporate shoots and the commercial work and is for non-union work. So union work usually has a higher rate. So movies, narrative projects, bigger commercials, they have to be on the union side. You have to be part of a union to actually work those. Unions set up their own rates and they're usually higher. And then there's the whole indie film side that I'm not covering here, but those are usually lower rates, sometimes a flat project rate. So you agree to do a movie for a certain price if you are a camera operator, right? So what does your rate depend on? First, it depends on your role. Second, it depends on your experience. So let me cover the 7 common roles in any production. For a 2-person all the way to a 20-person crew, you'll typically see one of these 7 roles in those type of projects, especially when you get to the bigger projects. If you're a solo filmmaker though, and you do the entire production on your own, I know a lot of people watching these type of videos, they're solo, basically a 1-person production company. I'm gonna share something with you about that in a second. Right now, let me go through the individual roles. So here are the roles that are more common in any production that is more than one person. Production assistant, that's basically the person that takes care of all things that need taken care of. Their day rate is typically $250 to $300 a day. That's based on a 10-hour day rate. Everything here is based on a 10-hour day rate. Then you have your grip, someone that's in charge of the lighting side of things, setting up lights and things like that. That's $600 to $700. That got a little bump post-COVID, so typically around $700 is where I've seen grip. In New York and LA, sometimes it's a little bit more. Then you have your gaffer, that's $750 to $800, again, based on a 10-hour day. And again, that got a little bump post-COVID. Then you have your audio technician, that's $800 to $900 for the labor side. So audio techs never, in my experience, work without gear. So their day rate is much higher than $800, $900 because their gear is included. But I'm just talking to you about labor here. So we'll talk about gear in a second and show you how that really bumps up your rate. But if you look at the labor side, audio techs make somewhere between $800, $900. Camera operators, now this is not the cinematographer, just you're operating the camera, you're not in charge of lighting. $600, sometimes all the way up to $900 if you're working on commercial. And then you have your director of photography. This could have a big range because this could have a wide range in the experience that you bring to the table. So on the low end, you shouldn't really charge another $750 as a cinematographer. And it typically goes up to $1,500. And it goes up higher. I've worked with cinematographers that make $3,500 a day, but that's more on the narrative and commercial side, union type of a project that really bumps you up in your labor. And then you have your director. Director could make, and again, similar to a cinematographer, higher starting point, somewhere between $900 all the way to $1,500. Obviously, directors could make way, way more depending on the experience they bring to the table and type of project. Corporate, commercial, non-union, $900 to $1,500 day rate. A lot of directors do work on a project rate, so that includes anything in the pre-production and they see the project all the way to the finish, past post-production. So in that case, it might be a flat rate and not based on day to day. Okay, so that's labor. What about gear? Well, that again depends on what your role is, if you can bring gear to the table, and how much gear you bring to the table. So some roles, as I mentioned, like audio techs, they just won't agree to work without gear. It doesn't make sense for them. They don't want to work with anyone else's gear. They need full control, make sure they could deliver a good sound. So they usually charge for a baseline package $400 for the gear on top of their labor. That could be, for example, 2 lavaliers and a basic mixer, maybe a boom. Then they could charge a whole lot more if they bring a whole lot more. Let's say you have a project reality show, 10 lavs, 20 lavs. They'll bring an assistant. They'll bring a whole bigger mixer. They could make significantly more, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a day, depending on how much gear. But remember, they're keeping it separate because you got to keep investing in gear, keeping it fresh, repairs. That's why it's really done this way, that labor and gear are charged separately. Some DPs won't work without gear as well. They charge based on what is required for that project. So for example, a common camera I use is a Sony FX9. Now that camera package could be $400 a day if it comes with a lens, tripod, things like that. Now, the way you find that out is you typically look in rental houses around you, see what they charge, and usually charge a premium a little bit higher than what they charge. Because with a rental house, there's a lot of extra fees. Somebody has to go pick up the gear. Somebody has to prep the gear. I bring everything ready to go on a production, right, when we offer the package ourselves. So on more like mirrorless cameras, you charge a little bit less. But look at what kind of package you put together and then price it accordingly. It's not just the camera bodies, the lenses, it's all the accessories. It's all kinds of different things you bring to the table. So that could really bump up your invoice. Now, the gaffer may use their own grip truck. So that could be $400 or $500 just based on a basic grip truck. And then they will charge for all the little lights they add to their package. So again, there could be a grip truck for $2,000, $3,000 a day, depending on how many lights they're bringing, what kind of lights, right? So a gaffer typically, when I have them bring their own gear, that could be $2,000 a day. And for an audio tech, again, depending on what they're bringing to the table, from a minimum $1,200 to $2,000 a day. So now I'm talking labor and gear as one bundle price. DPs could make closer to $2,500, $3,000 a day. especially when you're starting bringing high-end cameras to the table, like Arri Alexa, right? That could be closer to $1,000, $1,200 a day. Red cameras. If you're bringing basic cameras, you're on the much lower end of that. And sometimes I bring an entire video village. That could be two 17, 19-inch monitors with a whole wireless rig. All that stuff could be added as kind of a la carte if I'm kind of bringing all kinds of different things to set. Again, as a cinematographer, as a gaffer, as an audio tech, you're charging on top of that. If you're working as a PA, as a grip, you usually can't really bring any gear, right? Someone else is taking care of that. So then you're stuck on just charging for labor. It's really hard to elevate your rate based on gear and labor. Now, if you're a one-person crew and you do the entire shoot, you should not charge any way that I just shared. You should charge entirely differently. And you should charge as a video production company, even if you're one person, okay? That works entirely different. And I made a video showing exactly how to price things as a solo or as an entire video production company. Because you don't want to charge as a freelancer. You don't want to charge a DP rate or camera operator rate when you're doing all kinds of different things. And at the very least, you have to charge separately for your gear too if you're a one-man band and you're doing the whole production, okay? So if you want to learn how to price things for a video production company side, if you're a one-man band, that's what you are, so you should charge videos based on that kind of pricing. I covered everything on how to charge accordingly, and I'll see you then.